Let's move on to the drum tracks now. I'm going to start to listen to the drum mix in context. I'm also going to do some processing, EQ, and dynamics while the tracks are in solo, but I'm going to be careful to listen to the overall mix and not just focus on the tracks in solo. So I think that's very important because sometimes we get bogged down with how a specific track, like the kick, sounds in solo. Then when you listen to the processing that you've done on that track in context, it just doesn't sound the same. So here's what I have so far for the song.
So real. Tell me what
I'm gonna start on the chorus.
I sing along with.
I'm gonna use the EQ3 7 band to start getting rid of some of those frequencies I'm hearing. And right away, I'm hearing that there's a bit of boxiness in the low mid area. And I'm gonna first do a high pass filter just to see how high I can get without getting rid of some of the bottom end. Okay, so the high pass is not doing much other than getting rid of some of that low end stuff that you really can't hear. So you're not really getting rid of it, you just can't hear it. And as I start pushing it to the right, you start to hear the difference. So even though you can't hear it, it can actually begin to sum up towards the sum total of the mix. So I just rather not include it in the tone of the kick. Let's try another frequency. And let me play with the low pass filter. Okay, so right there it sounds good. There's nothing after that that I really need. I can probably use a little bit of the attack from those frequencies, but I'm gonna leave it there for now. Now I'm gonna look at the low end, or actually look at removing some of that low mid frequencies. And I'm using my Mackie Control Universal here to move between the different sections of the plugin. Go to the low mid frequency there. Okay, and this is where you have to be careful. By reducing about 10 dBs of gain reduction and leaving the Q at about 4, I was able to make the kick rounder, but I also lost a lot of the attack in the low end. So I'm gonna go probably with a high shelf now on the low frequency. So let's look at that, and I can change between the two EQ curves right there.
Sing along with you in this game for two. Tell me, babe, how do you feel? 'Cause I noticed that you
Okay, so now let's see if we can add some attack back on the higher mid frequency. So let's go to the high mid frequency. Let's go there. See what we can do there.
sing along.
Me solo the drums only. Okay, so I think that sounds good. Let's just review what I did to the kick in terms of EQ. And basically, I did a high pass filter at 36 hertz, and you can see it here, with a 12 dB EQ, a low pass filter at 2.5. So it's down here, it's very low, with a 12 dB curve or 12 dB EQ. On the low frequency, I've got a 3 dB boost at 146 with a Q of 1. And the low mids, I have a cut of 10 dB at 243 with a Q of 4. And then on the high mids, got a 8 dB boost at 3.5 and half a 0.6 on the Q. So nothing too fancy. The EQ curve looks crazy, but again, I don't focus on how it looks. I try to focus on how it sounds. So the next thing I'm gonna do is try to add a bit of compression. So if you notice, the CLA 2A compressor immediately adds gain, so you have to play with it. Otherwise, it starts to distort your kick. It's probably nice for some other, if you were doing a different mix or a different type of music, but we don't need it. So I've exaggerated the gain so you could hear what it does. It's sounding a bit fat. I like it, but the gain reduction is probably too much, and it'll start to eat up some of the transients. So I'm probably gonna reduce the peak reduction. Okay, so I'm getting about 3 dBs of gain reduction, and that's okay. It's sounding the way I want it to sound, and this compressor is easy to use. It's just got a couple of controls: the gain, the input gain, and the output gain, and the peak reduction. And actually, is this the out? No, I think this is the input gain. Let me just check that real quick. Okay, so that's the output gain. That's not the input gain. Sorry. Sometimes you have to remind yourself or go back to the manual to see what it is. So this is basically if the compressor was bypassed. So it is adding a bit of gain, but that's okay. I'm okay with that amount of gain. It's not really messing up the tone. So if you wanted to change it, you leave it on input, then switch to output. And that's how you would check that. Now that I've done a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression, the attack is starting to diminish. The kick is starting to get softer. So I'm going to use a transient designer from SPL to bring back some of the attack, and not a lot of attack, just a little bit. Okay, this plugin is fairly simple as well. You have your attack knob here, which I've got at 3, and then you've got a sustain knob here, which basically plays with the decay of the tone. In essence, like a compressor, and you can almost use it as a gate because it gets rid of some of that other stuff that's around the kick. So I really like this plugin. Let's listen to it engaged and then bypassed. Okay, now I'm going to bypass all of the processing that I've done on the kick so we can hear the difference. Great. It sounds great in the context of the drum mix, but that doesn't mean it's going to sound great in the context of the entire song. So let's listen to it in the context of the entire song.
Sing along with you in this.
Okay, so if you listen to the plugins engaged and bypass, you really can't tell the difference.
Sing along with you in this game for two.
That's good. Now, I just want to remind you where we started with the drums. Where we started with the drums when they were dry. And let me just highlight all of the drum tracks. And I'm going to bypass all of the plugins.
Sing along with you in this game for two. Tell me, babe, how.
Okay, so the changes are subtle, but that's just how I work. I don't like to really change the music that I receive to mix. In this case, obviously these are not my tracks, but I want to stay in the spirit of what the artist was trying to achieve. So, I can start adding samples and making the kick sound bigger, but that's not the point. You want to make it sound good and in agreement with the artist, you should be saying, hey, you know what, make it sound like this, make it sound like that. But then you're not just being a mix engineer, then you're producing. And I want to focus on mixing. So let's move over to the snare.